Hello everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. In cinema, the genre of horror is an ever-expanding one, and such is the case in real life too. After all, fiction is born in reality, in the minds of people who experience life in various ways, or have observed others in various ways. As a society, we have countless stories to tell, none of them truly the same, all told from a different lens, a different perspective, a different voice. Some of tonight's stories are among the most horrifying that I've ever read, and I choose that word for its literal definition: horrifying, causing horror, extremely shocking. And that, my friends, is exactly how I think you'll feel by the end of tonight's episode. Don't say I didn't warn you. So, let's get started, shall we? It's been a couple of months since I graduated from high school, and I've been looking forward to the freedom and excitement that comes with this new chapter in my life. However, there's something unsettling that's been eating away at my newfound sense of liberation. The suspicion that I'm being stalked by someone from my past, and honestly, I have no idea why. It all started innocently enough. With a few chance encounters in public places, I brushed it off initially, chalking it up to mere coincidences. They looked like someone I hadn't seen for a long time. Maybe they moved back, maybe it wasn't even them. But soon, these encounters became more frequent, and I couldn't ignore the deep sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. One particular incident stands out in my mind. The one that set off alarm bells and made me truly believe I was being stalked. I was walking through a busy downtown street, lost in my thoughts, when I noticed someone trailing a few steps too close behind me. I turned slightly and could confirm my suspicions. It was Hannah, a former classmate whom I hadn't spoken with in years due to her moving away sophomore year. So it was all some strange coincidence. Until I noticed a pattern. Everywhere I went, the local mall, my favorite coffee shop, even the park near my house, Hannah was there, lurking in the background like a shadow. It wasn't just passing resemblance either. It was undoubtedly her. The way she walked, the unique birthmark on her cheek, there was no mistaking it. What alarmed me the most was when I realized she had somehow managed to obtain my phone number. I started receiving anonymous text, subtly alluding to personal details that only someone close to me would know. Then just throwing in weird stuff like your secrets aren't safe. Just pointless because sure, we all have stuff we'd prefer the world doesn't know, but I don't have secrets that I'm scared of the world hearing. For some reason, I just knew it was her, even before she eventually revealed who she was. When she did, she just acted like it was all a joke I was supposed to be in on. I asked her how she got my number, but she never gave me those details, just continued to cross boundaries. It was as if she was watching my every move, liking and commenting on everything I posted, sending me DMs related to anything I posted. She even started to post pictures of herself at places I'd been to, using or taking photos of things that had either been on my Instagram or that I'd bought in public recently, places I'd seen her at. I was getting super overwhelmed seeing this online, piled on with the texts and chance encounters, where she'd really just watch me, not approach me or speak to me. I couldn't handle it, and so since then I've taken every precaution to avoid her. Not only did I block her number, but I blocked her on all my social media accounts, and I even started taking different routes to my usual destinations. But no matter how hard I try, I can't shake the feeling of being watched, like she's always one step behind me or in front of me. And it drives me crazy that I just cannot figure out why she's doing this. To cope with the unsettling situation, I confided in my best friend and family. They've been supportive, assuring me that my safety is their priority. They keep telling me that it's not my job to figure out why they're doing it, that she's unwell or something. I trust them, so I'm keeping my distance. Together, we devised a few strategies to keep me safe or make me feel that way, such as sharing my daily whereabouts with my trusted individuals and ensuring I'm never alone in vulnerable situations. Despite my efforts to distance myself, the constant fear and anxiety, they've taken a toll on my everyday life. It's made it difficult to fully embrace the excitement and freedom that should come with this new phase of life. Instead, I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder and questioning even the most benign encounters. It was quite a beautiful night when all of this happened. I'd been working at a hostel in Arkansas, and I'd met a German national named Amelia. We became a thing rather quickly and spent our nights searching and exploring the city streets and enjoying the lamplights in their orange glow, laughing, joking, kissing, hugging, all that sort of stuff. It was in October, a few nights before Halloween, and we were on one of our typical nightly escapades. I remember that the moon was bright. I can't recall if it was full or not, but I know that it was lit enough for us to witness all of our surroundings. There was this spot called Foster Pond, and her and I frequented a specific bench that seemed to never be occupied, almost as if it was only for us. Her and I sat there, gazing up at the stars, listening to the trickles of pond water, enjoying the scenery of the town around us. We felt untouched and unburdened. She and I had made plans to visit Germany next year and celebrate Oktoberfest together. It was an innocent time, really. After a while, Amelia leaned her head back more and more and stared up towards the constellations, and I fixated my eyes out toward the pond and the area that enveloped it. At first, it was just movement, motion, a lone figure walking down the path. Not unusual at midnight in this particular part of town. However, something grabbed at me in my slim-to-nothing attention span about this particular wayward walker. The walk was deliberate, methodical, angry, and fast. The first impression I had was that this dude really had something going on. Perhaps it was a Halloween party, or perhaps he had just been relieved from work and just wanted to get home. Something about the gait really got my attention, and I could not stop fixating on this man, just charging through the park in a mad dashery sort of way. Within a few seconds, I realized why I was so fixated on the guy. It was what he had in his right hand. It was a hatchet. Definitely a hatchet. Now, my first thought was, cool, Halloween costume, hatchet-wielding psycho. Well done, sir, well done. But another few seconds passed by, and I thought to myself, maybe not. Upon further inspection, it appeared as if he wasn't really in a costume, and it did not seem to be a mere prop. To be clad in nothing but shorts and a hoodie whilst wielding a hatchet would not be an inappropriate Halloween costume. I had to remind myself it wasn't quite Halloween yet, though. In fact, it was 2 days away. This was no costume, and that hatchet was not a prop. It dawned on me in the dark that this was straight up a dude walking across the park with a hatchet and coming straight to Amelia and I. At the moment, I wasn't quite sure as to what to do, but I figured it would be best to do something like get the hell out of there. I turned to Amelia and I whispered, "Hey, don't worry about it, and please don't ask any questions yet, but just get up and let's go. Let's go back to the hostel, now-ish." Okay, she said. Fortunately for me, she didn't ask any questions or present any disagreements. She stood up off the bench and I put my arm around her. We walked towards the hostel while I said, "Nothing's wrong, keep it cool." I wanted her and I to walk as if we didn't have a care in the world, as if nothing were wrong. Okay, she repeated over and over as I felt myself nervously picking up the pace while trying to seem chill and nonplussed. We got to the door of the hostel, and I opened the door and made sure that she went in first, and I followed. Then I locked the door behind me, tight. I peered out into the darkness, out by the pond. "What is it?" Amelia asked. She knew something was up by now. "What's wrong?" Feeling safer behind locked doors, I felt a responsibility to inform her of the situation, but I did not want to freak her out. For all I knew, I was the only person who was freaked out, but still. "There's some guy out there with an axe," I said. "A what?" Amelia asked. "Just look," I said. "Just wait." Sure enough, the man with the hatchet came right up to the bench where Amelia and I had been sitting. He looked left, he looked right, up, down, past him, behind him, in front, all over. He even looked down on the ground and scoured the place. Then, this figure emitted the most terrifying scream I'd ever heard escape a human body before. It was filled with torment, anguish, frustration. Behind closed, locked doors, the scream was loud enough to give me goosebumps. "The hell?" Amelia asked. After shaking his arms at the stars and sky as if the gods had wronged him, the figure with the hatchet sunk his hooded head down low and began to walk off back towards whence he came. We were safe, presumably. After reading the newspapers and talking to a few neighbors the day after, no information came. Nobody had known anything about this strange, solitary figure who paraded Foster Pond with a hatchet. I pray it was an isolated incident. Amelia and I never went to that pond after dark again. I'm not sure if everyone would agree that my story, strictly speaking, is a horror story, but if not that, I truly don't know how to classify it. My mom's currently a nurse practitioner, but she's done it all over the years, and hands down, her time working in the ER is where the real horror comes from. She's seen enough cheating men have their you-know-whats chopped off, and barely hanging on that she could barely remember and didn't have an exact number. And then there's the stuff that people put inside their bodies. Butt stuff. Well, mostly butt stuff. There's actually one of an old lady that particularly got to me, and I'm sorry in advance for sharing it here. A 75-year-old woman came into the after-hours clinic complaining of a stench down there. The smell had been growing progressively worse over the last few weeks, and she was getting worried. The doctor put her in stirrups and got in there. He found a ketchup bottle top jammed way back there. I'll let your minds work out the rest. Anyway, back to the main event. This was in the 90s, when my mom was working in an ER. A man came in complaining of bloody bowel movements that were extremely painful. This guy was still crying from the last one as he explained the problem. Most doctors try to be reassuring and lighthearted so the patient will tell the truth, but some are just assholes, like the one that my mom was working with that day. He went straight to asking the hard questions and talking to the patient like he was an idiot. So, of course, the man just clams up and doesn't have a clue what could be wrong. Everyone assumes this guy shoved something unspeakable up his ass, and they all started taking bets on what was in there. They take him for an x-ray, and then, lo and behold, this guy has a motherfucking baby snake in his goddamn ass. Dead, obviously, but it got itself in there pretty deep before suffocating. Drowning? Maybe it was crushed. I never thought to ask what the snake actually died of. Okay, I just called my mom and she couldn't be sure, but she always assumed it died from lack of oxygen. Anyway, nobody won the bet, and they had to do an emergency surgery to remove it. The guy went on to make a full recovery, but the number one question on everyone's mind was, how? When confronted with his x-rays, the man went as white as bedsheets and continued to fervently deny any knowledge of how the snake got in there. But Mom said his face told a different story. The doctor was in and out, so she worked on making nice with the patient. She really wanted this story. Eventually, he did tell one. Maybe it's the truth, or maybe it just took him that long to think of a story he felt less embarrassed by. Either way, the only narrative my mother received was as follows. The night before, he'd been at a friend's house for a small gathering. Everyone had been drinking and doing a bunch of drugs. This friend owned pet snakes and had recently hatched a new clutch. The cages were in the dining room area where everyone could see them. At some point, his ex shows up with her new boyfriend, and they had a minor altercation that came to blows. The patient ended up embarrassing the new boyfriend, who promptly left after the fight, and that was assumed to be the end of the night. The night went on, more drugs and alcohol were had, and the patient eventually passed out on his friend's futon, which was in the same room as the snakes. The next morning, this guy wakes up with a mega hangover and just feeling like overall shit. So he didn't think too much out of the ordinary about the discomfort to his rectal area. But as he went to leave, he saw the ex's new boyfriend was back and learned that he had returned shortly after the patient had passed out. He also felt that his friends were acting strangely, and as he got in his truck, he noticed they were watching him through the window, but then they quickly scattered when caught. His ass and lower back felt a bit sore as he sat down, but he attributed that to a hard night of partying and just went home. It was there he experienced his first painful bowel movement and became concerned. Concerned that for whatever reason, he couldn't actually make it. Hoping it would simply go away on its own, he did nothing. As the day wore on, the pain became increasingly intolerable. So he took a few painkillers. They took the edge off for a while, but he later experienced a second, more torturous bowel movement, and this time the pain was excruciating enough to send him to the ER in tears. And the rest, as they say, is history. The operation was a success. Several people took pictures of the snake during and after, but they were all on disposable cameras, so sadly, my mom didn't end up with a copy of anyone's snapshots. Maybe that's not so sad. But yeah, I found that story fairly horrifying, so I thought others might too. Enjoy thinking about that one while you fall asleep tonight. Cheers. I'm an old man now, but I grew up in foster care during the 70s. I know that's still a rough life for a child to endure, but it used to be much worse. People get checks from the state for each foster kid they take in, so lowlifes would put on a good show for social workers and get approved. Then they would squeeze as many children as they possibly could into their homes, dress them in rags, and feed them gruel for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Most of the time, kids are shoved into 1 or 2 rooms filled with prison-quality bunk beds. That's what my foster home was like. And several of the kids had been to other homes that were just as bad. It feels like there's no escape except surviving long enough to reach 18. Even if you get away from one hellhole, the majority go straight to another. I was only 6 when I arrived at the Smith home. They were extremely kind when the social worker dropped me off. They hugged me, gave me cookies and milk, and made me feel safe. Then my social worker left, and they took it all away. Mrs. Smith grabbed my wrist so tightly, her fingernails dug into my skin. She said that she was going to give me the house tour and teach me the rules. I was to pay attention closely, as nothing would be repeated, and the punishments would be the same on me as they were on all the others. The refrigerator and pantry had locks on them, and Mrs. Smith wore a key around her neck. We were never allowed any snacks or toys unless a social worker was there, and the nicely decorated children's rooms they had upstairs were just for show. We weren't even allowed to enter those. Me and my 7 foster siblings slept on the prison-style bunk beds in the basement. They were all crammed together, with 2 on the back wall and 1 on each side wall. Being the youngest and the newest, I got the one with the most holes and piss stains. The mattresses were bare, and we were each given 1 pillow and 1 blanket, which were also stained and filled with holes. The basement door was kept locked at night to prevent wandering, and we were given buckets in lieu of a bathroom, buckets we cleaned and emptied ourselves. Officially, we were homeschooled because the Smiths feared what we might say at a real school. Unofficially, the only thing we learned were household chores. The girls did a lot of cleaning and cooking, while the boys helped Mr. Smith with the outside stuff. I was so small that I spent most of my time raking leaves into burn piles and carrying the firewood inside. Billy was 15 and the oldest. He was the one who fought back the most, so he received the worst punishments. They wanted to make an example out of him, so the rest of us didn't follow his lead. He was regularly beaten, and in some cases, he was locked in an old tin doghouse overnight. During the summer, it was just hot and miserable, but during the winter, it was like sleeping in a freezer, especially once the snow came in earnest. One day, Mr. Smith pushed Billy too far. He wasn't in foster care because his parents didn't want him. He was there because they were killed in an accident, and he didn't have any other family. The only thing he had left from his parents was a plain hemp necklace with a few beads, and it belonged to his father. It was absolutely worthless beyond sentimental value, which is the only reason he'd managed to hang on to it for so long. Well, Mr. Smith became enraged that some chores still hadn't been finished. So he came up behind Billy, grabbed the necklace, and tore it off of him. The beads scattered everywhere. I had just come back for another load of firewood and witnessed the entire event. Mr. Smith just kept screaming like the necklace didn't exist, but Billy's face was turning blood red and contorting into a look of pure rage. Suddenly, in a blur of movement, he pounced onto the old man, and both went to the ground. Billy sat atop Mr. Smith and beat his face in. I could see the blood fly with each strike. I was hiding by that point, silently praying my brother managed to kill that bastard before anyone could stop him. But then I heard footsteps crunching in the snow. Slow at first, but then faster and faster, until I recognized the shrill sound of Mrs. Smith's scream. She emerged from the tree line seconds later, and she was holding a rifle. I wanted to yell for Billy to run away, but no sound would come out. I was completely paralyzed as I watched it all play out in slow motion. Mrs. Smith didn't even call out a warning. She just raised her weapon and fired, shooting Billy directly in the head. He instantly flew backwards with the ear-splitting bang, the top of his head now completely obliterated. The Smiths weren't the least bit fazed by any of it either. Mrs. Smith helped her husband to his feet, gave him a good telling off for being bested by a child, but then they just calmly threw Billy's body into a wheelbarrow, as if he were nothing more than a pile of soiled hay. Then Mr. Smith took him into the woods while his wife followed behind with 2 shovels. That's when I got the hell out of my hiding space. I knew they would kill me too if they knew I witnessed the whole thing. When they later returned from burying our foster brother, they called the police and social worker to inform them Billy had run away. They got away with everything for another 3 years. That's when Margot came to live with us. She was 12, and she was the first child the Smiths couldn't break. After only 1 week with us, she snuck away in the middle of the day and ran all the way to a neighbor's house, which meant a 3-mile hike through a thick forest because she couldn't risk traveling by road. She told the neighbors everything that we had told her, and she showed them the fresh welts across her back. The police were then called, and before we knew it, the Smiths were in handcuffs while we were all being shipped off to new homes. I was extremely lucky with my next family. They turned out to be my forever home and eventually made the adoption official, but I'll never forget the years I spent living with the Smiths. There's something about the birth of a child that attracts demons for a certain amount of time before and after the child is brought into the realm. People that are close to the family often begin to have vivid night terrors. Some may even see the demons trying to infiltrate their sanctity. Before my sister Harriet even knew she was pregnant, her and her boyfriend were nearing the end of their abusive 3-year relationship. Chris was a psycho that everyone in the family hated. He was a bully and would leave Harriet with a broken cheekbone before moving out to Vegas with his friend. Her hospital visit is where doctors would tell her that she was pregnant. Harriet obtained her ex's phone number from his sister. When Harriet broke the news to Chris, he hung up on her, and they never spoke again. The further along she got in her pregnancy, the more negative energy would attract to Harriet and the people closest to her. I saw firsthand dark entities loitering in the corner of her bedroom like wallflowers waiting to be acknowledged. I never gave them the attention they sought after, ignoring their presence as I passed through rooms. Pretty quickly, they would realize there wasn't a sustainable source of energy for them to take from, and they'd leave. When they go, they move to the next member of the family, searching for an easier source to feed from, like my cousin Isaiah. He called me 15 miles outside the reservation at some gas station payphone, saying that he had walked to a garage sale that he'd seen in a vision earlier that morning. It showed him where the perfect gift for the new baby would be. When I picked him up, he hops into the passenger seat and tosses a large, dirty, stuffed Scooby-Doo in the back. My eyes follow the stained dog as it lands in the back seat before I ask him if that's what he's got for the baby. With excitement, he says, yeah. I ask if his vision really showed him a dirty, stuffed dog to give to this baby. He says the vision showed him where, but not what. When he saw the Scooby-Doo doll, it's like he knew that's what he was there for. He was too tired to make the walk back home, though, so he was grateful that I was able to come pick him up. We dropped the stuffed animal off at my sister's, and she was just as perturbed about the gift as I was. Afraid the matted dog had germs, Harriet set it out back as soon as we left. A few moments later, she'd hear pounding at the front door. Thinking it was me or Isaiah again, she leaves the back door open and hustles over to open the front. But by the time Harriet gets there, nobody's on the other side. When she turns around, the stuffed Scooby-Doo is sitting at her feet. She kicked it away in fright, sending the dog under her dining room table before running to the back bedroom and locking herself in. I'd receive a call just after dropping off Isaiah. Harriet was calling his house phone. She knew that's where we were going next. I almost missed it, but Isaiah ran out calling my name as I was getting ready to leave his driveway. Going inside to pick up the phone, I couldn't help but notice how much Isaiah had let the place go to shambles. A week prior, I showed up to get some firewood and this place looked fine. Now there was newspaper taped to every window. Looking up, I was astonished to see the ceiling covered in reflective aluminum foil. When I answered, Harriet told me what happened. She feared someone was in the house, and she asked me to stop by again on my way home. She said her back door was still wide open. I told her I'd be there, then hung up. Before leaving Isaiah's, I asked why he'd done all of this to his home. He told me he heard an Art Bell episode with someone saying aluminum disrupts the alien tracking transmissions, or ATTs. Isaiah firmly believes he was abducted when he was a toddler. He says if you've been contacted, they'll continue to contact you until your purpose has been fulfilled with them, whatever that purpose may be. I believe in extraworldly beings, but not to the extent of Isaiah. We live right next to Lake Michigan and Lake Superior, and he's always said the aliens were living somewhere out there, under the water. I thought Isaiah was losing it. Almost not wanting to be an enabler of his delusions, I told him Harriet needed me to swing by her place, but we'd continue the conversation later that night. Once again, I'd find myself putting out a cigarette next to the one that I'd ashed out a few hours prior. But now, the sun had set by the time I walked around to the back of her house to see that the door was still ajar. When I walked in, the stuffed dog was sitting on the couch in the dark living room. I flipped on a couple of lights and called out for Harriet, but she didn't respond. I walk back to her bedroom and knock on the door, then call her name again. A couple seconds later, I hear the doorknob unlock, but she doesn't open the door. When I slowly push it open, I'm met with a butcher knife inches from my face. She screams, I scream, and we both leap backwards. Harriet says she didn't know it was me. Apparently, moments after we'd gotten off the phone together, she heard someone call her name from the living room. Knowing it would be impossible for me to have arrived that fast, she stays hidden in the bedroom. The voice called out to her a few more times. It even tried the bedroom door handle before leaving. I didn't know what to say. When she sees the stuffed Scooby-Doo on the couch, she asks if I put it there. When I say no, she grabs it and throws it out the front door, then latches every lock that she has on every door and window attached to her home. Harriet exhausts herself, walking from room to room, checking out the windows for any unwanted visitors on her property. The temperature had dropped severely, and it started to snow that night. When Harriet asked me to stay, I was reluctant because there was a high chance we'd be snowed in the next day. But when your sister is 7 months pregnant, it's your inherent duty as a brother to make sure she feels safe. So I obliged and made myself a bed on the sofa. That night, I tossed and turned. Harriet's couch was uncomfortable, and the paper-thin blankets she'd given me wasn't enough to escape the cold. At one point during the night, it begins to feel exceptionally cold. I'm dozing off, but still awake. I open my eyes, and you can see snow falling on the front porch. This jolts me awake, realizing what I'm looking at is shown through the door frame of an open front door. Standing just inside the doorway, partially hidden within the darkness of the living room, I see it. A demon stood silently in the living room, between the small amount of light casted from the window and the open door. When it clicked in my head as to what I was looking at, I tried to act like I didn't notice it crouched down in the corner. Exercising every bit of willpower I could muster up, I forced my eyes closed and focused on slowing my heart rate. To this day, I don't fully know if that was a dream or not, but when I woke up the next morning, the front door was shut and locked. I'd soon open it again to find over 6 inches of fresh snow had landed overnight. Harriet was still asleep, and I was going to attempt to dig my truck out of her driveway before bothering to wake her up and say goodbye. Borrowing a small shovel from her patio garden, I begin to shovel the snow away from my back tires. A couple stabs in, the shovel makes contact with the gravel, so I move to the back right tire. My first stab into the snow, I hit something hard, but it's not the ground. I don't know what it is, so I start to dig around the object. Soon, I discovered it was a boot I'd previously hit with my shovel. I grab the boot to pull it from the snow, but when I lift it, the weight immediately indicates the boot's attached to something. I dug under my truck more, uncovering a man. He's in a t-shirt and sweatpants. From the looks of it, he froze to death seeking shelter under my truck. I run back inside and wake up Harriet before calling tribal police. Harriet gets on some shoes and walks outside with me to see the frozen man. She's horrified to discover that it's Chris lying under my truck. When the snow thawed, we'd find other belongings of his, They were in the bushes that lined her house. Detectives said it looked like he'd been camping out there for at least a few days. My theory is that he was planning on going after Harriet, but when he saw me there, he decided to wait, but didn't expect the weather to change so dramatically. But who knows? Chris was a bit of a drunk. It's possible he passed out unintentionally. Either way, I'll never look at shoveling snow quite the same, or Scooby-Doo, for that matter. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. Thanks again for listening. Also, huge thanks to everyone. We reached 5K subscribers and still going. So thank you all so much and welcome to everyone who's new here. Don't forget, we've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open long enough to find those deep sleep videos and, of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. A huge shout out and a big thanks to all of my patrons, whom I appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. Or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.